Twitter has a huge cybersecurity problem. Twitter's former head of security just whistleblew that the security practices inside of Twitter are bad, like really bad. In this video, we're going to dive into what exactly was included in that report, what that means for you, and really if Twitter is a safe platform. These accusations do get more and more concerning the further we go in this video, so do stay along because it's not great. Twitter has been engulfed in a lot of controversy and debate in recent years. From concerns about bots on the platform to a cyber attack in 2020 that resulted in the accounts of President Biden and former President Obama, among others, having their accounts taken over. And this debate goes far beyond just the cybersecurity concerns. It also goes into debate and public discourse and the role that social media plays in public. And frankly, all of that's just too far for this channel to really be covering. So we're going to be focusing just on cybersecurity because that's my area of expertise. Whether you are a casual user on Twitter or you have a large following and you use it to promote your business or some other kind of content, this impacts you. So the former head of security at Twitter, Peter Zatko, released a massive disclosure on Twitter's internal security practices. In his view, Twitter's not only violating cybersecurity best practices, but they're outright lying or misleading investors and other oversight entities, which honestly, this could be a big deal if it's all true. The first thing that I want to dig into, of course, is how Zatko details internal security is handled at Twitter. For background, the best practice for any kind of internal organization is to really limit user access and limit employee access. Really, an employee should only have access to only the resources that they absolutely need to perform their job and no more. And their access will get reviewed and limited again anytime that they switch projects or they switch teams. And this basically is a way to ensure either if their employee account gets hacked, that the hacker is not able to access too many things, or if the employee themselves make a mistake, that the mistake doesn't impact too many things. According to the Zatko, this isn't happening. Instead, quote, thousands of employees have access to Twitter's critical controls. That's not good. Now, he doesn't say specifically, at least here, what those critical controls are, but it doesn't really matter. Another best practice is accounting, or basically knowing which employees make which changes at what time and on what servers. This gives some retroactive security, so if something happens, you can look back into the logs and see who made what changes, so you can identify if it was basically a mistake or if something malicious was going on. Zatko claims that this isn't being done internally at Twitter either, and I think that's especially concerning whenever you pair that with the last claim that employees have way too much access to critical controls. If Twitter is not able to internally track which employees are making specific changes, and each employee is able to access a ton of sensitive controls, that is a potential recipe for some problematic things. And it's not just the risk of insider threats that is a concern. Zatko later details how there is a massive portion of Twitter's infrastructure that is outdated and it lacks the basic security software like encryption or the ability to implement vendor updates. Far be it from me to criticize a large organization for having this problem. After all, I understand that really is actually fairly common across the industry. The larger the organization is, the harder it is to keep all the infrastructure patched and upgraded. You'll have a test environment and what's called a production environment. The production environment is really where the business is done, and the test environment is almost like a replica of the production environment where you can implement patches and changes early, and you can assess if there are any issues in how that patch impacts the environment, and you can work those kinks out there, so that way whenever it's finally time to push the patch into your production environment, you can do it seamlessly and with no downtime. That being said, that increases the amount of work that it takes to implement patches, especially the bigger the organization goes. So for an organization like Twitter to have a significant amount of its infrastructure outdated, that actually tracks. That makes a lot of sense, and that's not necessarily something that is inherently wrong with them. What is a concern though is that the basic security features like encryption and being able to implement vendor patches isn't there. Like that's actually not good. And you would hope that there is some sort of an active routine to get all that infrastructure up to date, at least as much as possible. Now, that's not just a concern whenever it comes to hacking, because previous versions will have security vulnerabilities, and that's really where the patching comes in. So it's not just a problem that you're running the risk of hacking with having a large portion of your infrastructure being outdated. Zatko outlines how another portion is availability, which if you've stuck around on this channel, you know that availability really is a third of what cybersecurity is trying to protect. Zatko points out how even a minor outage could potentially devastate Twitter. And while that might not even necessarily be the result of a cyber attack, it could be something as simple as maybe an update in the production environment goes wrong. Maybe the internet goes out, or maybe the power goes out and the backup power doesn't come online in time. These are seemingly simple things that could have a devastating impact if your infrastructure is not built to be resilient from these kinds of things. And that's really what Zatko is saying is not really being done very well with Twitter. So those are some of the technical things that are going wrong with Twitter. But the fortunate thing, and we'll talk about this more later in this video, that can actually be all turned around relatively simply as long as like your leadership is on the same page, the security staff is ready to go to work, and everybody knows, okay, it's time to batten down the hatches and get this thing figured out. They're bad vulnerabilities, don't get me wrong, but you can still turn the ship around. However, that is not so simple if the rest of Zatko's claims are legit. You cannot implement better security if the leadership is not squared away. I think we can all agree that you need to be forthcoming about your security issues. Zatko shares a story about how he wanted to offer investors and oversight organizations a written and detailed and full accounting of Twitter's security situation so that way they were tracking both the good, the bad, and the ugly. He then shares how he was approached by the CEO, Parag Agrawal, as well as some of his cadre to, instead of giving a written and full account of the security, to instead give a verbal and cherry-picked account of Twitter security to really paint a rosier picture of security. That's not phenomenal. We've also talked about Zatko's accusation that Twitter gives way too much access to way too many employees and how they really do not have the internal controls to validate when employees are making changes or any kind of recourse. And this is where things get, in my opinion, much more concerning, and that is that Zatko accuses Twitter of having been exploited by foreign intelligence services. This was reinforced by a rather pointed notification from the US federal government to Twitter that it had at least one, if not other, employees that were on the payroll of other foreign intelligence services. That's not good. In fact, Zatko's report came public only 2 weeks after a former Twitter manager had been indicted for spying on behalf of Saudi Arabia. So that's bad, but it gets even worse whenever you consider that back whenever the war started in Ukraine, Parag Agrawal, who was then CTO or Chief Technical Officer at Twitter, had pushed for Twitter to cooperate with Russia in ways that could have potentially led to additional censorship or wide-scale surveillance on the platform. That cooperation may have been in opening a local office in Russia, which was a result of a law that was passed at the start of 2022, where Russia was requiring tech companies to open an office inside of Russia in order to basically operate within Russia. The implied threat from Russia to Twitter was that if they did not do so, then they would lose out on advertising revenue, which for a company like Twitter, that is a pretty significant income stream for the company. Fortunately, the push to cooperate with Russia was dismissed outright as soon as it was pushed. But this is still a concerning characterization of the CEO from Zatko. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. The concerns about cybersecurity with Twitter, they're definitely a concern, but for the most part, aside from the wide-scale access that employees have, the really bad permissions management that Twitter's being accused of, it's not necessarily that shocking to me, and it is still something that, in my opinion, can still get turned around, fairly expeditiously, and it's not like Twitter has scrubs in their security staff. They have really intelligent and capable people. So I do have faith in the platform to get the thing sorted out. The thing that bothered me was the accusation that it's being actively exploited by foreign intelligence services. We've talked before on this channel about the impact that information warfare can play and how it and cybersecurity do have a relationship. And nowhere does this play out more than really on social media, especially a platform like Twitter, as I'm sure you've experienced. Now, this whole report comes as Elon Musk is engaged in a legal battle, basically trying to pull out of his deal to buy Twitter. And his accusation was that Twitter didn't have good accounting on the bots that exist on the platform. This will no doubt probably pour some fuel on that fire. Not only if these accusations are true, does it seem that Twitter has poor accounting of the bots on the platform, they might have poor account of their own employees and their own security, which that is absolutely a concern. Now, Twitter has denied these allegations and they have rebutted by saying that their security is strong, their practices are strong, and they even have chosen to characterize Zatko as a disgruntled ex-employee. That characterization of Zatko is something that has itself been rebutted by many cybersecurity experts that know Zatko. And to be honest, I'm going to trust the cybersecurity experts on this. Of course, Twitter would have a reason reason to characterize Zatko a certain kind of way because these are rather scathing accusations. But that said, the people that I trust in the cybersecurity space are really saying that Zatko is credible, a good, motivated person, so I'm kind of going to go with them on this one. I also want to say that the security issues that Zatko pointed out in this report are probably already in the process of being addressed fast, quick, and in a hurry. Security almost always ends up being an afterthought, and unfortunately what tends to happen is that organizations won't really kick in their security groove until they've had some sort of externally applied pressure put on them, whether that's through a cyber attack or whether that's some sort of a leak or a whistleblower, or it's a combination of those like in this case. So is Twitter even safe to use? I mean, I use it, but that's not to say that it is. And I love the fact that this got released right after I released a video on TikTok. There's some proof that social media security isn't just a Chinese problem like what a lot of people seem to make it. It's an everybody problem, and it absolutely is an American problem as well. Use good judgment, do your research, and don't take anybody's word for it. Make a decision based on the information you have and based on your own risk tolerance. Nobody can secure you better than you can secure you. But absolutely do stay tuned because I'm going to be following this story. Speaking of TikTok, check out this video about if TikTok is spying on you. I feel pretty good about this video, and I think you would too if you watch it. With all that, I'll see you all next time. Later.